normative frameworks of any social human interaction. In a world where international cooperation relies on multilateral organization, language cannot be seen as a mere communication tool. It becomes a political and normative instrument. Before the United Nations, international organizations already faced linguistic challenges, as the League of Nations that used only two languages, French and English, a choice reflecting the geopolitical order of the time. However, with the end of World War II and the emergence of a new multipolar international order, the need for a more inclusive approach emerged at the same time as the founding of the United Nations in 1945. The UN embodies that shift using 5 languages from its start: English, French, Chinese, Russian, and Spanish, adding later on Arabic in 1973. However, with more languages come more challenges. What power dynamics determine the use of a language within an organization? And does multilingualism really promote the universality of law, or does it introduce normative uncertainties? This presentation will explore those issues in 3 points. First, we will see how language functions as a tool of power. Then we will analyze how legal complexity can arise from multilingualism. And last, we will explore how linguistic plurality can also serve as a lever of legal power. So let's dive in. One of the key aspects of understanding the presence of multilingualism within the United Nations is realizing that the organization itself attributes power to it. Take, for example, multilateralism. It is present as a foundational principle of the organization, and multilingualism is always presented as a complement. From the start of the organization, multilateralism is presented as a key pillar of the organization. Take Article 2 of the UN Charter, that states that the organization is based on the principle of sovereign equality of all its members, which means that all states have an equal foot in the debates of the United Nations. However, such equal participation must be related to a linguistic framework that allows all delegations to participate, understand, and speak during those debates, which is multilingualism. The intrinsic relationship between multilingualism and multilateralism is reflected in numerous General Assembly resolutions. You have some examples here. So the first one is Resolution 56262, that states that multilingualism promotes unity in diversity and international understanding. In 2017, multilingualism is considered as a core value of the organization. And Resolution 63346 goes even further, declaring that multilingualism is an enabler of multilateral diplomacy and that it contributes to the promotion of the value of the United Nations. Beyond official text, several key figures of the organization have also emphasized the close relationship of multilingualism and multilateralism, as you can see here. Therefore, multilingualism is far from being an administrative mechanism. It is designed as a key lever of multilateralism, ensuring balance between states and enabling true inclusive international cooperation. However, the importance of multilingualism within the organization is not the sole reason explaining why there is several languages used on the international stage. Indeed, states made languages a crucial component of their national power strategies. Far from being a technical issue, multilingualism becomes a strategic instrument. So, indeed, language is a central tool of soft power, defined by Joseph Line as a state's ability to increase its influence without coercion, generally to diplomacy, political volume, or culture. Take the UN Statute of Official and Working Languages. It is highly coveted as it grants greater visibility and diplomatic power to states. Since the statute is very limited and fiercely protected, the budgetary argument is often used to block the entrance of any new languages within the organization. In 1948, during the debates surrounding the entrance of Spanish as a working language within the organization, one of the key arguments put forward by New Zealand and the United Kingdom is its estimated cost, which was seen as too expensive for a post-war economic context. For Argentina and other speaking Spanish countries, this argument was completely false, as the organization could easily absorb the costs. Similarly, in 1968, during an attempt to include Russian as a working language, New Zealand again and the United States presented a cost estimated over $2 million, which the Soviet Union immediately contested. It is interesting to note that the budgetary argument is always put forward by English speaking, from English speaking countries, which the question is now arising to whether those countries are really concerned about the budgetary of the organization or in maintaining the special statute of English within the organization. This systematic opposition contrasts with other decisions where alternative solutions were found when power dynamics allowed it. Take Arabic, which became an official and a working language within the organization in 1973, at the condition that Arab states funded its costs for the first 3 years. Similarly, German, which obtained a special status within the organization in 1974, is still funded by German-speaking countries. So those two cases are showing that budgetary obstacles can be bypassed when political interests are strong enough. The politicization of multilingualism by the organization itself and its member states explain why there is several working languages within the United Nations. However, multilingualism has some consequences on the writing and application of international law, particularly when we take into account legal translation. So, unlike other forms of translations, legal translation doesn't produce an equivalence of the original text. It just generates an official text that has the same legal value as the original. In other words, as Article 33, paragraph 1 of the Vienna Convention of the Treaty says, all the linguistic version of the same text have the same legal value, requiring consistency in legal translation. as any divergence can lead to legal consequences. However, legal translation is not as easy. And one of the main challenges is the growing complexity of legal translation. And this is particularly the case in international texts and in the United Nations, as those texts are filled with technical vocabulary from various fields. And I have two examples of that. The first one is from 1949, when the World Health Organization reported that only 25% of its documents could be translated by general translators, as the remaining documents needed the presence of medical and scientist specialists. Similarly, in 1968, a Russian translator reported that he has difficulties translating technical Russian expression in English, although he was specialized in metallurgy, the topic of his text. So this increasing technicality makes legal translation even more delicate, as each translating word must be precisely correspond to a specific legal or scientific concept, leaving no room for interpretation. However, in addition to those intrinsic difficulties, there is also institutional constraints within the United Nations. And in 1980, the Joint Inspection Units reported that translators were often confronted to poorly written texts or also hastily drafted. And there is also a numerous numbers of texts that are written in a language that the author doesn't fully master. So those difficulties weaken the clarity of and the legal and the precision of the legal meaning of the text, increasing the risk for misinterpretation. Those difficulties are still present within the United Nations, and they are even exacerbated by the constant pressure on productivity. Indeed, high output expectation gives less time to terminological research and text verification. While equality between linguistic versions of the same text is a fundamental principle of the United Nations, translation-related difficulties sometimes lead to subtle yet significant discrepancies between language versions. And those divergences can be used by states in international disputes. And this is particularly evident in the case concerning military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua. This case opposed Nicaragua and the United Nations and the United States from 1984 to 1986. And one of the key issues of this affair is that the United States challenged the competence of the court by relying on Article 36, paragraph 5 of the ICJ statute. After the fall of the Somoza Debayle regime in 1979, the United States started by supporting the new Nicaraguan regime, but they ended their economic aid in 1981 and started backing paramilitary groups against the regime, which are called the contrasts. This brought the Washington before the ICJ in November 1984, as Nicaragua accused the United States of covert act of war, notably by financing, arming, and coordinating those paramilitary groups. However, the United States argued that the ICJ lacked jurisdiction over the case, And this is a restrictive interpretation of Article 36, paragraph 5 of the ICG statute. Because Nicaragua's declaration of compulsory jurisdiction under the Permanent Court of International Justice was invalid at the time. Indeed, the ICG replaced the PCID after World War II, and the ICG statute allows the transfer of certain declarations under specific conditions. However, there is a linguistic divergence between the French version of the text and the English version of the text. The French version states that declaration that was made for a duration that has not yet expired could be transferred to the ICG. However, with the English version and the use of still in force, the declaration is requiring that the declaration that has to be transferred remained legally binding at the time of its transfer by the ICG to the ICG. This linguistic divergence allowed the US to argue that Nicaragua's declaration had never acquired a binding force and couldn't be transferred to the ICG based on the English version of the text. However, for Nicaragua, the importance wasn't the formal entry into force, but the validity period of the declaration. And all of this is based on a technical default of the Nicaragua ratification of the declaration. In 1929, Nicaragua had signed the PCID protocol, but had never completed the ratification of the text. In 1939, a letter from Nicaragua to the legal nation indicates that the ratification instruments were to be sent, but there is no recollection of it in the archives leak. Therefore, in 1942, the League officially informed Nicaragua that its ratification instruments had never been registered. So this is a procedural default that allowed US to argue that, if you could switch again, that argued that Nicaragua's declaration never acquired legal force under the PCID, saying that consequently, under the English version of the text, the ICG could not claim jurisdiction. However, Nicaragua insisted on the French version of the text and the intent behind it, which was to ensure continuity between the two parts. The provision then excluded only declaration that has already expired. Therefore, when Nicaragua ratified the UN Charter in 1945, it automatically became a party of the ICG statute. In November 1986, the ICG ruled in favor of Nicaragua and the French version of the text, because it aligned better with preparatory work and the intent behind the text. Therefore, the ICG declared itself competent in this case. This case illustrates the role of multilingualism on international stage, as translation discrepancy can alter legal translation. States are well aware that the issue and they are strategically exposed linguistic divergences. But multilingualism is not just a default for international law. It also had positive influence. And let me introduce you to the concept of constructive ambiguity. Ambiguity is often perceived as a default in international law. However, when ambiguity is deliberately introduced to legal text to facilitate negotiation, it becomes a strategic tool. Constructive ambiguity was theorized by Henry Kissinger as a means of overcoming diplomatic deadlocks, allowing states to accept a compromise without fully considering their position. For a legal provision to qualify as an example of constructive ambiguity, there is three conditions, which is the presence of ambiguous language, the deliberate intent to maintain ambiguity, and the presence of an illusion of consensus. This technique is very present in multilateral negotiation, and it allows agreements among diverse states, which with diverse interests. Constructive ambiguity can also be reinforced by the presence of multilingualism. This interaction between constructive ambiguity and multilingualism can serve three strategic functions, which are enables flexible interpretation. It also creates room for diplomatic maneuvering, and it allows gradual clarification of legal obligations. However, presence of constructive ambiguity can also lead to international disputes, and notably in the application of international law. In 2002, tensions escalated over Iraq's alleged possession of weapons of mass destruction, leading to the adoption of Resolution 1441 to determine whether Iraq had breached its disarmament obligation. However, there is a presence of ambiguous wording and divergence between the two linguistic versions of the text. As the English version, using material bridge, has strong legal meaning, referring to Article 60 of the Vienna Convention of Law and Treaty, both using material bridge. This article, the Article 60, allows for the suspension of a treaty in case of serious violations. However, the French version of the text, as you can see, the Article 60 used in French violation patente, but the French version of the Resolution 1441, if you could switch to the next one, use violation patente, and the article is saying violation substantielle, sorry. This is a much weaker formulation as the two texts doesn't rely to one another. United States and the United Nations and the United Kingdom, used the English version to argue that Iraq's non-compellence justify a military intervention. However, for France, using the French version of the text, the situation is requiring more diplomatic steps before the use of force. Here we have the same legal framework, but different course of action. This is a clear instrumentalization of ambiguity for geopolitical interests. As finally, the United States used the English version to justify their attack on Iraq in 2003. Therefore, constructive ambiguity is a double-edged sword, as it facilitates negotiation, but its long-term effects on international law remains controversial. Ambiguity only postpones the resolution of disputes, and it complicates the application of international law. Nevertheless, there is still temporary some positive outcome using multilingualism, and this is, if you can switch again. Great. Multilingualism can be a driver of legal innovation and the development of international law, and this is particularly present in the International Criminal Court, as it faced multiple cases involving persons speaking language with no established legal tradition. Therefore, the court has to create and adapt legal concepts. The ICJ officially used 6 official languages, French, English, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and Chinese, and 2 working languages, French and English. But Article 60 of the Rome Statutes states that accused individuals have the right to be informed of these charges against them in a language they fully understand. And the presence of the terms fully understands lead the court to use situation languages we can be described as local language spoken by the parties involved. However, those languages, which you have some example here, including Acholi, Tamashek, Lingala, and Swahili, often lacked of structured legal vocabulary. Therefore, the court has to develop an entirely new legal terminology to use those languages during a case. This is the case for Zagawa. Zagawa is a Saharian language spoken in Chad and Sudan, and the presence of this language in a case in the ICC led to the necessity to train paraprofessional interpreters and to create legal terms, as Zagawa doesn't have legal or judicial terminology. Similar effort was required for Acholi in Uganda, as the translation of the Rome Statute into Acholi necessitated the introduction of new legal terms and the development of a specific legal glossary to standardize those new terminologies. Here, linguistic adaptation plays a crucial role in the dissemination and the appropriation of international law in those affected countries. It facilitates the integration of international norms. Multilingualism, in the case of ICC, is a force for legal transformation, leading to linguistic innovation and extending the scope of international criminal law, thereby contributing to the development of a more inclusive and universal legal system. So, we have seen that language is a major issue in the development of the soft power of states. At first glance, multilingualism within the United Nations can be seen as an instrumental, political instrument, a diplomatic tool used to assert the influence of certain states. Its role in the development of international law, therefore, can be seen as secondary, even incidental. However, the reality is more nuanced. While the United Nations presents multilingualism as a fundamental tool for achieving their objectives, this assertion is not solely political. It also reflects on fundamental necessity. Multilingualism plays a crucial role in the development of international law, as it enables the accessibility and universality of law. It allows states and other international actors to appropriate legal texts, to promote their dissemination, and also to prevent the domination of a single legal tradition on the development of international law. By requiring international organizations to clarify their concepts and adapt their norms to diverse cultural and linguistic realities, multilingualism contributes to the diversification of a legal system and, in some cases, normative innovation. However, while multilingualism promotes universality, it also weakens the legal security by introducing ambiguities. As legal translation 6, perfect equivalence, the introduction of some some ambiguities in some divergence in terminology can lead to completely opposed interpretation and therefore to international disputes. Thus, while multilingualism ensures greater inclusivity among states, it also weakens legal security and the uniformity of international law. Multilingualism, at the end, cannot be seen as a pure vector of universality. It is both a factor of extension and a source of complexity. Therefore, the challenge for international organization is to reconcile the linguistic plurality and the need for a more stable legal interpretation. But new questions are now arising. Can artificial intelligence and the digitization of legal work reduce the challenges of multilingualism, or do they risk introducing new imbalances? Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know.